Hey folks, welcome to the Power of Zero show. I am your host, best-selling author David McKnight, author of Power of the. Hey folks, welcome to the Power of Zero show. I am your host, David McKnight, best-selling author of The Power of Zero, Look Before You Lerp, The Volatility Shield, and most recently, Tax-Free Income for Life. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, I'd welcome a follow. It's @McKnight&Co. And if you're looking for someone to help you navigate the pitfalls that stand between you and the 0% tax bracket and mitigate longevity risk, the #1 risk facing retirees these days, head on over to davidmcknight.com. And if you are looking to be able to mitigate longevity risk and tax rate risk in your clients' portfolios, and your financial advisor, head over to powerofzero.com, powerofzero.com. We'd be happy to schedule a phone call with you. All right, let's jump right into today's topic, which is the U.S. population time bomb. And this episode has really been inspired with the release of the U.S. Census that tells us what's been happening with population and demographics in our country over the last 10 years. So this is what they call the decennial census. Means it happens every 10 years. They use it to get a sense for what the population growth looks like, but also if they have to rejigger, congressional districts. We note that a couple of states have lost seats, a couple of seats have gained seats. That's not the central focus of today's podcast, but that's one of the reasons why they do this decennial census. Okay, what I want to talk about is the rate at which our country is growing, or rather the slowing of the rate at which our country is growing. So let's talk about some numbers here, and then I'll make sense of this for you and talk about what this means for you personally. Okay, so the 2020 census told us that there are 331,449,281 U.S. residents, which represents basically a 7.4% increase over 2010, when the count was 308,745,538. So why is this 7.4% increase in population significant? It's significant because it represents the second slowest rate of growth that we've experienced as a country. It's only slightly higher than the 7.3% growth we received or we experienced throughout the entire decade of the 1930s, which was during the Great Depression. Okay, it's roughly half the 13.2% growth rate that we experienced in the 90s when immigration was high and the last part of the millennial generation was born. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that when you combine the lower birth rate, the decline in inflows of immigration, and a rapidly aging country, and we'll get into some more specifics here in a minute, that means that we are entering a period of substantially lower population growth. In other words, this census confirmed all of our worst fears as it relates to the rate, really the birth rate and the rate of growth of our population in our country. Ronald Lee, who's a demographer out of University of California, Berkeley, says this is a really big deal. If it stays lower like this, and this is a pretty big statement, I have to admit, he says it means the end of American exceptionalism in this regard. He says we've always had our population far outpace the growth of other developed countries. That is no longer the case. We are now having as few children as a lot of these countries in Europe. So one of our huge economic edges throughout history is we've always had a lot of children. That has not been the case over the last 10 years. There are a couple of states, Western states, along with Texas, Florida, and North Dakota, who have experienced upticks in birth rates, as well as population growth, due in some part to immigration. Utah, Idaho, Arizona have all seen upticks. They're higher than they were in 2010. Nevada showed the biggest growth slowdown among that group, and that may have to do with the housing crunch that resulted in the wake of the Great Recession. Why is this happening? Why are we experiencing lower population growth? Okay, so let's dive into what's driving this trend, and then we're going to get into the implications for you and your retirement. Low natural increases, in other words, fewer births, more deaths, reflect in part people delaying marriage, people delaying childbearing, particularly among the economically hard-hit millennial generation, and also a rise in drug-related deaths and pandemic-related deaths. In the meantime, the U.S. population as a whole continues to age. In other words, the average age of Americans is growing older and older and older. And that's going to continue to increase into the future. Now, historically, even though we haven't always had low rates of birth, we have had that over the last couple of decades. One of the things that's helped compensate for that has been immigration, okay? Here's the reality. Our birth rate in our country is about 1.7%. That is not a replacement birth rate, okay? That's not enough to replace a mother and father. If two people have 1.7 children, that means the population on the whole is shrinking. And so historically, the answer to this demographic quandary has been immigration, okay? Primarily from Mexico. This is not a political issue. This is just a demographic reality. The issue has been that we have not experienced nearly as much immigration as we have in decades past. Immigration was reduced for a couple of different reasons. First, federal restrictions at the border led to a decline in the non-citizen foreign-born population. The rates of immigration had been rising since the 70s, but they really have leveled off since the Great Recession in 2008, and they actually went into decline during the coronavirus pandemic. And this is according to Jeffrey Passel, who's a senior demographer at the Pew Research Center. He says, the reason why fewer people are coming to the United States from Mexico has been tougher law enforcement on the border, especially after 2010. And Mexico has had an improving economy, so more people are sticking around. And Mexico has also experienced a lower birth rate. So Mr. Passel says the change in the Mexican flows is really what caused immigration to level off. So fewer birth rates in Mexico, not as many people coming across the border, and a better economy in Mexico. So what does this mean for the next decade in the United States? What are the implications of these slowing population growth rates in our country? Well, basically what this is saying is that the growth rate in our nation is as tepid as it's been at any point in our history, and what we're likely to see as a result of this low growth rate is a slowdown in economic output, okay? You have fewer people in the country that are producing fewer goods and services, so you have a lower GDP over time. Here's one of the issues. We have in our country right now more 80-year-olds, more people that are 80 plus than we do people that are 2 years or younger. As Tom Hegna famously said in our documentary, The Power is Here, the Tax Train is Coming, he says, like in Japan, we will soon come to a time when we sell more adult diapers than we do baby diapers. So we are becoming more demographically stagnant as a nation, which means we will become more economically stagnant. So we have to face a couple of different things. We either not need to have a much higher birth rate, and you can see in other countries, in other parts of the world, they're facing the same issues. They are starting to offer huge financial incentives to citizens in Russia and other parts of the Eastern Hemisphere to have more children. If you don't have more children, then you start to shrink, your economy starts to shrink, and you have to reckon with all of the economic implications that go along with it. So that's what we're facing. We're facing demographic issues, which will in turn affect economic realities in our country, not just in the coming decade, but in the decades beyond. So what does all this mean for you personally? What does all this mean for you from an economic perspective? It means that we are going to have a hard time funding social safety nets and entitlement programs for citizens in our country. If you think about it this way, in a perfect world, every subsequent generation should be larger than the previous generation. If you're sort of growing your population, exponentially, every subsequent population should be bigger than the previous generation. That is not, in fact, what's happening. What we need to have happen is the demographics need to look like a pyramid where you have a broad base of younger people that are helping support the tip of the pyramid, which is the older portion you economically can pay for things like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. We do not have a pyramid form of our population. Our population is actually an upside down pyramid. We've got 78 million baby boomers, and we're expecting the younger generations who are having children at a much decreased rate. We're expecting them to be able to pay for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid for this retiring generation of baby boomers. That's just not happening. That's just not what we're seeing. We're not seeing the types of birth rates and the types of immigration rates that we would need to see to have our population grow at such a rate that we can continue to afford these programs. What that will likely mean for our country is that we will need massive infusions of cash to be able to pay above and beyond what current tax rates are able to provide, massive infusions of cash, because we're having a increasingly decimated population from which to derive the revenue necessary to pay for these programs. So how do you save for retirement if you're marching into a future where the demographic reality is an upside down pyramid? Well, the only real solution is you have to save in tax-free vehicles. You have to pay taxes on your retirement dollars, do so at historically low tax rates, get those dollars socked away in a tax-free account so that by the time you have to take these dollars out somewhere down the road, when tax rates are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today, you've paid the piper and you can then take those dollars out tax-free. So that means if you're trying to make a decision on whether to take a tax deduction today or to forego that tax deduction, pay the tax at today's historically low tax rates, and take those dollars out somewhere down the road when tax rates are likely to be higher, take those dollars out tax-free, I think that the results of this census give you even more motivation for doing so. If you are done saving for retirement and you've got the lion's share of your retirement savings in a tax-deferred vehicle, like most Americans do, 95% of Americans have their dollar squirreled away in tax-deferred vehicles versus tax-free vehicles. I think it's time to really start taking a look at taking advantage of today's historically low tax rates. I've said this before. Under current law, these historically low tax rates expire in 2026, January 1st, 2026. They revert back to what they were in 2017. I believe that given Joe Biden's posture on taxation, on taxing those young, that make less than $400,000 if you're a married couple, less than $200,000 if you're a single couple, you will not see your tax rates change. I think that he will extend those tax rates beyond 2026. I think they'll extend through 2029, which means in all likelihood, you have 9 years within which to take advantage of historically low tax rates. So by the time the day of reckoning hits this country, and I want you to sear this number into your psyche, sear this number into your subconscious. 2030, you need to get the heavy lifting done before 2030. There will be a perfect storm of events, demographic events, economic events, the underfunding of the entitlement programs. All of these things will hit and converge in this perfect storm in 2030. I think we have the potential to see a depression, the likes of which we have not seen really in over almost 100 years. If you don't believe me, you can always read the book Prosperity in the Age of Decline by an economist. I think his name is Brian Boulou. That's sort of a French name. I'm not sure quite how to pronounce it. He has made a lot of, he's been predicting economic trends for the last 5 decades. He predicted the 2008 economic crisis, the 2001 economic crisis. I think he's right on this one as well. You cannot ignore demographics. Demographics are your destiny. You can predict the future by predicting demographics. So if you need someone to help you navigate the shifting of these assets from tax deferred to tax free, or help you understand what types of tax free vehicles within which to contribute money, head on over to davidmcknight.com. And if you are an advisor who wants to help your clients and prospects make this shift as well and start getting at or near the 0% tax bracket and eliminating longevity risk all the while, then I would suggest you head over to powerzero.com. We'd be happy to set up a phone call with you. All right, folks, that is the show for today. We will look forward to chatting with you same time next week.